Welcome to the Weekly Squeak, your weekly geeky squeak with me, Christian Schiller. A slightly short show this week. Basically, it's going to sound kind of lame. I finally decided to take my old MacBook Pro. I mean, it's not old. I mean, it's one of the newer ones, but one of the first generation of the newer ones. Yes, the ones with the dodgy keyboard. I finally decided to go and get the keyboard repaired under Apple's extended warranty program. And I'm using my backup Windows Linux machine. And oh my, how difficult it is to switch operating systems when you have got used to one for decades. So I am very, very unproductive right now, trying to figure out how to set things up and how to use things, and all sorts of wonder that you suddenly realize you need to set up when you haven't set up a computer from scratch in nearly 20 years. Anyway, and hopefully also the audio quality here comes out okay. I know my interview later, which is with Patrick McFadin of Datastax, of Apache Cassandra, amongst other projects. I suddenly realized Audio Hijack, which I normally use for recording interviews, does not exist on Windows. So we just took the Zoom recording, which is not going to be as good quality as it normally might be. But the interview was great, so hopefully stick around for that. Enough complaints, enough disclaimers. Let's get started with my links for the week. First, an article from Andrew Leonard on 1.0. This is entitled, "The Blockchain is a Reminder of the Internet's Failure." Now, this article may not necessarily be what you think. In fact, it's quite a pragmatic article. He's not necessarily criticizing blockchain as a concept or as a technology, but more as a way that engineers have a tendency to create solutions without ever asking people what problem they had, and how that the internet tried to do this in the first place and then kind of reinvented itself, and that blockchain is kind of a manifestation of this engineer's way of thinking. It's not even a particularly new article. I'm not entirely sure why it popped up on my Medium digest. I guess because I've been looking at a lot of blockchain articles maybe. But I enjoyed it. And if you feel that way, and actually this harks back to many interviews and conversations and articles I've covered in the past, this aspect of making sure that you solve problems people actually have, as opposed to just creating technologies that solve no one's problems apart from your own and maybe a select handful of other individuals. So enjoy. And your comments, please. As always, you can find contact details at christianschiller.com/contact. I'd love to hear from you. Next, somewhat fitting. This is from ZDNet, but obviously was widely reported. This is particularly from a friend of the show, Stephen J. Vaughan Nichols. And this is an article about the Iowa Caucus app and what went wrong. And I heard more detail on this, I think, on Tom Merritt's Daily Tech News show, actually, where they went into a bit more detail about the companies behind it. These companies have names like Shadow. I mean, you couldn't make this up. And how it was completely untested, how there was no backup, and it was it's a shame actually how every time there has been a proposal to use digital solutions for voting, it has gone terribly wrong, meaning that anyone's chance of wanting to do it well is always set back by another few years. And maybe one day we'll actually get this right, and there will be online or digital voting. But in the meantime, I think we're going to be sticking with paper a lot longer. It has its flaws, but I guess it's easy to recover from. It's easy to implement. It's lowest common denominator. Everyone can understand it, etc., etc. But it's such a shame that this story, or this case, I suppose, not only was a negative for digital voting, but also for the Democrats as well, and gave Trump a lot of ammunition against them and how they couldn't organize a proverbial piss up in a brewery. Maybe that's not exactly what he said, I don't think, but anyway. So it's a shame on many, many counts. And the company behind it. I think I used to work in agency as well, and I like to think I worked for a good agency, but how many agencies just kind of pump out things for as little money as possible and don't necessarily build the best quality they could either. So a whole combination of problems there leading to this unfortunate situation. Next, an article on Quartz from Dan Kopf. This is a wonderful, wonderful article, and there's been a lot of this in the news recently, I guess because of the new version of the release after 37 years of MIDI 2.0. And MIDI was also featured in a book I did not enjoy as much as I would hope, you, what was it? It was you are not a product. Oh God, I can't even remember the name of the book, but how algorithms are running the world, basically. And he complains about MIDI there as well for sanitizing music. And the article goes into this a little bit. The current or the old implementation of MIDI was very restrictive and kind of dictated how music happened, especially when MIDI was very popular in the 80s and less or so around the 70s and 90s as well. And how many people kind of recreated music to suit the style, and that MIDI suited keyboards and not stringed instruments or brass instruments, and the subtleties that were lost in music because of it. But no longer. MIDI 2 actually goes deeper, adds a lot more subtlety. And maybe, I mean, MIDI has obviously had a bad name, well, not a bad name, but a reputation for such a very long time, that will this version change people's opinions, and how quickly will software and operating system and hardware operators incorporate it to mean that it can finally become an expressive protocol? I'm interested to see, actually. I'll be interested to follow the progress of it, and when devices start coming out to support it, and software, of course, and what kind of creations emerge. I remember when, I guess they're still made, like MIDI guitars and things, but they were always very odd. And it'd be interesting to see how that would happen now, because obviously with guitars, unlike pianos, traditional pianos anyway, you can get like weird bent notes and quarter notes and do all sorts of things with strings and wind that keyboards don't allow you to do. So it'd be interesting to see how MIDI 2.0 represents all those. Happy birthday, happy anniversary after 37 years. It's quite amazing. Next, an article on Dig, actually a website I haven't ever really mentioned before, but this is from businessfinancing.co.uk originally. And I'm not going to go into much detail here, but I love maps, and this is a map of all the oldest businesses from every country on a map. And actually, I was expecting to have heard of some of them, and actually haven't heard of most of them. And it's interesting to see per continent the kind of companies they are. So in the new world, they tend to be primary resources or banking. And in the old world, they tend to be actually breweries is one, distilleries, things like that, proving that people have always needed to drink when they went to the bank or when they went to work, I suppose. If ancient mapping and history kind of interests you, then take a look. And I suppose it's interesting to see the differences between the new world, Australia, America, Canada, etc., and the old world, and the relative ages of those businesses as well. Anyway, take a look. It's a nice little map. Not much more to really mention, but just take a look. And are any of these businesses familiar to you? It would actually be an interesting question to answer on christianchiller.com/contact, because I haven't heard of most of them, but maybe you have. And now an article from Danny Van Kooten, just his private blog. And this is fairly swift. I would have actually liked to have maybe seen a little bit more detail, but it's certainly an interesting opening conversation on a topic that we kind of know about, but we ignore. And this is CO2 emissions of websites, and how he went into some lengths to try and reduce the CO2 emissions of his websites as much as he could, I suppose. I mean, if you're running on shared hosting or any kind of cloud hosting and you can't even really guarantee where your site is going to end up, it's like so here in Germany, we often have to split water and heating bills between the whole house. So if you save, but then someone else uses a lot, then I don't know how much have you accomplished. And I wonder if it's similar here. If your website runs perfectly, but everyone else in your sort of hosting provider's VPS is running inefficiently, then what have you accomplished? Or if they run their business very badly, what have you accomplished? I don't know. But it's a fascinating thing to start thinking about, and how you can optimize your websites, reducing dependencies. Every tiny kilobyte that you reduce means less CO2, I guess. So if you're interested in starting this conversation, it might actually be someone I try to do an interview with on the show, actually. But take a look, and then I'd be interested to hear your feedback on how realistic you think this is and what real impact it will have on CO2 emissions. And finally, I'm rounding off with 2 airplane stories. I don't know why. I don't know why I keep getting these airplane stories. But the first one is from Scientific American, and the headline is slightly scary, but I suppose we have decades of proof to make us feel a little more comfortable. And this is called "No One Can Explain Why Planes Stay in the Air." Or to be more precise, there are 2 schools of thought about why planes stay in the air, and no one has quite decided which one is true. We know how they take off, but we don't know how they stay. And it's something of a scary thought, but quite amazing to think that something that is used so widely and we know really very little about how we accomplished what we accomplished. And whilst that's a little bit scary, it's also kind of cool and kind of amazing to think about it. So yeah, if you're not about to fly soon and don't want to be scared off the concept, then have a read. And I suppose this ties nicely into the CO2 emissions. But anyway, yes. Why do you think planes stay in the air? Which opinion do you go with? And there's some it is a scientific website, so there's some great details about each theory, and I'd love to know, which one do you think is true? I'm not quite sure yet. I hadn't ever given it much thought. I think generally I don't want to give it much thought. I suppose it's one of those things where sometimes you're just like, I don't actually want to think about how this is working, but it is, and I will just be happy with that fact. And finally, another article from ZDNet, but covering a slightly different angle, from Katalin Kimpanu, called, this is another slightly scary title for anyone who travels a lot by plane. Only 3 of the top 100 international airports pass basic security checks. And before we go any further, let's just recap who those 3 are, or where those 3 are. And Europeans will be very happy because it is Schiphol in Amsterdam, Helsinki Airport, and Dublin Airport. So 3 European airports. And I have actually been to 2 of those. I've been to all 3, but 2 regularly, and they are very nice airports, actually. So this was more about cybersecurity, the apps, systems, and things like that, and whether they use best practices for cybersecurity. And I mean, I think we've all seen how shonky some airport applications and technology are. And I guess, everything is as strong as its weakest link. So if an airline is focused on security, but then the airport security around it is weak, then what have you accomplished? So, yeah, interesting. And this included some very basic things like using HTTPS, which you would hope was just standard these days. A proper setup of email servers, using firewalls, and removing vulnerabilities from mobile apps. And to be honest with you, this is kind of, maybe this feeds back into the Iowa caucus problem. These feel like such basic things to be checking, and any developer should be checking. And is it just money saving? Is it incompetence? Is it not updating? What is it that is causing these problems? These seem such basic things to fix. Like pretty much every service recommends fixing these sorts of things now. So how do these problems get created in the first place? I think is the more concerning thing to think about. Maybe next time you don't fly from any of these airports, which leaves quite a lot left, maybe you should complain. Maybe you should point out the problems they have and the vulnerabilities caused and complain. And I know my own experience of complaining to airports never gets you very far, but you can give it a go, and maybe enough people will make the industry change and become better and follow pretty basic best practices, some of which will not even take half a day to fix. So really, with some of them, there are no real excuses. Now enjoy my interview with Patrick McFadin of Datastax, where we talk about Cassandra, Datastax the company, and some of the other products that Datastax produces and maintain. Enjoy.
I'm Patrick McFadin, and I work in developer relations. I also work in the Cassandra community, in the project and user community. I have for 10 years more, since early days of Cassandra. So I've been around since... I know all the characters in here because I've been around with them. Datastax was a company that was built specifically for Apache Cassandra support and services, and just being, as open source projects emerge and become mature, there's usually a commercial company that pops out. Yeah. And I think that's a pretty standard trend. Well, we're that commercial company that popped out for Apache Cassandra. Our co-founder, Jonathan, was the first project chair for Apache Cassandra. And we actually started out as a company called Riptano and later changed our name to Datastax. But that's what we've been doing for the past, say, 10 years, but just trying to grow Cassandra into the biggest, baddest database on the planet, and figuring out how to bring it to enterprises, which is tough because, the open source software fails at the enterprise gateway, and finding a way to make it easier for them. Mostly it's around support and services, but also building our own distribution that hopefully solves a lot of ticks a lot of boxes. But we have multiple things that we do now that are in support of that. Like we're getting ready to launch. We're in beta with our cloud product, which makes that easier. We have some other products that are coming soon, like AppStacks, which makes the data modeling better. So we're just continuing to advance the needle on all the products that are required and needed. But probably what's most interesting for you right now is we have a new CEO, we have some new direction, and it's pretty exciting.
I think I'm more interested in digging into some of the technical stuff, but let's go back a step.
I will go into the technical stuff because our CEO is very technical.
Let's go back a step. Cassandra is reasonably well known, but let's go back a step. So from memory, I can't quite remember. It was born out of LinkedIn or Facebook, I think.
Well, it was two engineers at Facebook. Avinash and Prakash were engineers there, and the fun part of that story is Avinash was one of the original authors of the Dynamo paper.
Okay,
and he worked at Amazon. Went to go. This is how engineers go, right? He was at Amazon, went to go work at Facebook. Said, hey, that Dynamo thing was really cool that I worked on it at Amazon, but I think that it would be better if we changed the data model. So they developed it around the Dynamo model, not Dynamo DB like you can buy it. Amazon.
Okay, the Dynamo.
Not
paper.
that. Yeah, the Dynamo paper. Yeah.
I think a lot of people assume they're the same thing, but I guess
no. And it's funny because I think that was like when I think they just said, "Wow, that's an awesome name. What can we use it with?" And because it's not the same, database. But what's cool about it is I think that they tried to take some of the same concept. Dynamo paper was originally a key value store.
Yep.
But it was trying to answer the question: is how do we keep a database online 24/7 and deal with enormous amounts of failure, or like an entire data center going offline? Because if you think about it, Amazon's in the business of making money, and from everything I've read lately, they're doing a good job at that.
Pretty well.
And when you're offline, you're not making money.
Yeah, for sure. But I actually, there's a lot on the usage side I'd like to dig in, but I'd just like to get one more bit of the backstory, because there's interesting in that with most Apache projects, the company and the Apache project are generally fairly well connected. But it's interesting that Datastax was not the company that originated the project, or not the initial company anyway. I'm sure you've been involved from very early days, but is there a particular reason that Datastax kind of stepped in as the main maintainer / kind of overseer as opposed to Facebook? Or is that just company culture? Or
well, Facebook is not in the there lately have been a little better stewards of open source projects like RocksDB.
That's the word I was looking for. Yes.
Yeah, stewards. Yes, yeah. That's how we call it. We don't call it owners. There's no owners in open source. It's stewards. Facebook has done a better job lately. I think there's also some debate there, but that's not their business. It runs their business, and they're happy to make it an open source project. But as I mentioned, the reason Datastax exists is because the project chair, and this is kind of a fun and interesting part of it, is you think of companies like MongoDB or Mongo, who has MongoDB, they own the whole thing. It's not an Apache project. It's theirs that they open source, and they can do whatever they want. They own the trademark. They own everything. So that's a pure top-down open source company. Apache Cassandra is an Apache project. It is owned by Apache Software Foundation. And as I mentioned, how Datastax got involved. Well, Datastax became a company from the project chair of Apache Cassandra, Jonathan Ellis. So there was a connection there. At that point, Facebook had not put any energy into Cassandra, and Avinash and Prakash, that's why they donated it to the Apache project.
Okay. Interesting. And just out of interest from Datastax perspective, you just mentioned you're coming into beta with the cloud offering on top, which is a difficult time to be doing this. We know we can talk about that later, maybe. But so what has Datastax been doing apart from that in terms of a monetization strategy for the core open source project?
Well, support and services are more or less that's the bedrock of open source, trying to make money around open source. And we sell a licensed product. It's an enterprise, and it adds a lot of things like particular security things, integrations, those sorts of things. I mean, I think primarily when you talk to a large company, a Fortune 100 company, and they're looking to implement open source, they get really nervous about just doing it on their own. And they have the resources. They could put engineers to it, and that happens. Apple employs a lot of Cassandra committers because they have that kind of cash. But they're also in the mind of, well, we can also rent that too. And so when we work with enterprises, they're like, we believe in what Cassandra is. I mean, how the technology works is awesome. Always on, scales like crazy, multiple data centers, perfect. That's what we want. But we want a little more, and we're willing to pay for it. That's a perfect opportunity for Datastax to create a great relationship. The database isn't going to fail you, and we're going to make sure you do it right.
Okay. And I mean, we know this space is relatively busy, the sort of NoSQL space. It's not as much as it used to be, but still kind of new offerings emerging. But Cassandra does have something of a reputation for working pretty well on large data sets, and it obviously comes from creators who are used to it. I'm looking on the Apache page, and you mentioned Apple. They have, and I think I remember when they switched over to Cassandra, 75,000 nodes, which seems ridiculous.
I think the latest one is like 150 or 200,000. So Datastax Accelerate, which is our user conference in May, Dinesh, he's like the spokesperson for the iCloud engineering team that runs Apple. I'm waiting for and he does this every time. The first slide he puts up is all the numbers, and they're always ridiculous. I mean, petabytes of storage, bazillion nodes. I mean, it's kind of fun. I mean, it's one of the highlights of the conference for sure.
It's actually quite interesting looking at these numbers because Apple has 75,000 nodes with 10 petabytes. Netflix has 2,500 nodes with 420 terabytes. Sorry, I missed a few zeros there. That's why. Okay,
rounding error.
Yeah. So, and then added to that is also CERN, GitHub, and many others. I'm skipping over a few here, but just ones that especially a technical audience will understand and appreciate the kind of data throughput they're probably going through. So what do you think at the core, what do you think made Cassandra so well designed to handle this kind of capacity in the first place?
That is exactly what Cassandra is the way it was designed. And this is the magic sauce is how it started. And I'll go back to the Dynamo paper. It's really it's the only database that grew up and made it out of the Dynamo paper that has usability. I mean, it's usable. So the three things that are really important are the scale, the way it scales. I mean, it can go from 0 to petabytes, and it's designed to do that without having any downtime. You can do this online. It's the speed. It is really a fast database. Very rarely do people say it's not fast enough. And then in the resilience, the way that it replicates data, and because it's an availability and partition tolerant database. That was the two, out of the CAP theorem, consistency, availability, and partition. Cassandra was built around availability and partition. With the tunable consistency, that AP part is so you think of every business needs availability and partition tolerance because this is the world we live in. Like I said, Amazon had it right. Like, we're offline, we're not making money. And you look at all the list of companies there, they're like, yeah, we can't deal with an hour of downtime because our database went sideways or we lost a data center. You just have to be ready to deal with failure. So Cassandra started with that. And what's fascinating to me is you see databases now that have, older databases, like relational databases that are trying to glue on these features, like replication and things like that. And it's a mess. It's hard to work with, and it isn't very resilient because it's an afterthought. That wasn't what it was primarily designed to do. So when you look at that list of companies, they're like, yeah, this is what we need, and we're going to make it work. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it's been a long time. That's the thing, is we've proven it. It's been in the most critical production workloads on the planet, and it has held up just fine. It's proven. And I love it when people throw FUD at Cassandra. I'm like, that's like saying the moon doesn't exist. I mean, come on. Or the earth is flat.
Well,
you're believing in something that doesn't exist. Yeah.
Let's not dig too deeply into that one, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear this stuff, it's like, well, Cassandra will fail and it's not good enough. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Can we get over this now? It's great.
On that point, though, one of the facts on the Apache page that jumps out at me is this: every node in the cluster is identical.
Yes.
I have encountered a few distributed databases that claim this, and is always it's always not strictly true. Is that completely true with Cassandra? There are no concepts of masters and
nope.
other. Yeah, I can't think of the more appropriate words these days.
Yeah, the leader follower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one's quite decided on the consistent replacements to those horrible words yet. But yeah, anyway, you know what I mean.
Yeah. There's no elected leader, and you noticed a very important thing. All of those databases that have elected leaders they have a consistency first, so they're like CP databases or CA databases, and which are most or if not all of the other databases in the world. So of course, but no, Cassandra is definitely a shared nothing architecture, and so of course they're not like every node stores all the data. That would be ridiculous. But it's architected in a way that each node stores a certain percentage of the data plus replicas from other systems. And it's a very consistent way to do it. We use consistent hashing to do this. It is deterministic. We know where things are. It's not random. But the way that basic architecture of that ring architecture works really well. And yes, so if you lose a node, it doesn't bring down your database. Mm-hmm. And it's really, I used to do this thing with Raspberry Pis. I'd have a small Raspberry Pi cluster set up, and I would have it, an outside client like pounding away at it. And I would take a hammer and smash the shit out of one of the nodes. And I mean, of course, for effect, but everyone was like, what happened there? And the application doesn't even blink, doesn't even flinch.
Yep. This is I have seen a few distributed databases do. Actually, maybe I've seen you do that.
You might have seen me do that. I did it on stage with a fire axe.
Yeah, that's
a blender.
Familiar. I've definitely seen people just pull a NUC or a Pi out of a cluster, but destroying it is more memorable. And I have definitely seen someone do that. So
I did it at OzCon 1 year, and it was almost semi-controversial. People were really upset about how violent it was. I was like, all right, it's a Raspberry Pi.
Well, anyway.
We had a drill, and we were drilling through them. I mean, it was fun.
I would shudder to. I'd actually like to see what the Pi is doing whilst you're doing that as well.
There was some. We had to test it a couple of times, because what I was worried about is it shorting and causing a fire. And I'm like, okay, we can't have a fire in the expo hall.
Wow, I'm actually frankly amazed that something that small would cause a fire. But anyway,
well, electricity. Yeah.
True.
And this is, that's what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about the database going down. I'm worried about a little node causing a fire.
Well, that's a headline in itself. Venue caught on fire, database okay.
See, all right, Chris, you and I get along great, because I am in the P.T. Barnum school of there's no such thing as bad news.
One more quick question on Cassandra itself, and then I'd just like to ask a couple of quick ones on Datastax a bit more. And that, I think, maybe one of the few negatives, especially for people starting with Cassandra, is this custom query language. And I mean, to be honest with you, I think back in the day, this used to be in comparison to SQL. And I don't know how many big application users these days are really coming from SQL backgrounds anyway. So maybe the comparison doesn't matter so much. But have you noticed any kind of difficulty in people understanding that, or are the sort of SDKs and wrappers so mature now that most people are just doing queries through those?
Have you been a fly on my wall?
No,
Yeah, this is a current conversation for sure. But I'll tell you, the CQL language, Cassandra query language, and I was involved in that design early days because it's meant to be familiar. Instead of having, hey, let's have yet another query language out there that is just completely unfamiliar, let's build it as a subset. Now, there's good and bad, but my hypothesis has always been everybody comes from relational. Everyone knows relational databases. So you know the syntax, you know how to insert data, insert into table where, values, where, I mean, all these things are there, select from where, that's a pattern you understand. I think what gets people into trouble is then they start thinking, well, this is SQL, and they start doing things like joins or full table scans. And so I spend a lot of my time educating users on, and we start our training. We do these workshops all over the place, these free workshops. And the first thing I say is, all right, I know you all have SQL background. Awesome. I'm going to explain how to go from there to here in a language you are familiar with. And I'm going to show you all the sharp edges and explain why this is the right language to get the data out. And it just go, and really we could skip the rest of the day and just go into the primary key, how it works. I mentioned the primary key, or I mentioned like how the data is distributed. That primary key is the key to your success. And I think there's a light bulb moment once people get, that's what the primary key does.
Yeah.
And this is how it works for me and my data model. And then we're off to the races.
Okay. And coming back to Datastax, I see that, I mean, whilst the cloud offering is coming and the enterprise offering you've mentioned, I can see you have some other things as well. You have a graph database, intriguingly.
Yep.
You also have Kafka connectors and a few other, and also Kubernetes and containers tools. I mean, are these basically just from observing how people usually integrate Cassandra into their application and you figuring out the places where you can help with that? Or are these very separate offerings?
It's if you think of anyone deploying Cassandra, of course, it's not an island. It doesn't just exist with no other connections to the world. Kafka is a great example of getting data from point A to point B. We're probably going to be point B. So let's make that work. It also uses our CDC on where when you insert data into the database and it's committed, it emits data. So we also feed into a Kafka queue. And so into a topic. So, Kafka is an important part of our ecosystem. The Kubernetes thing is developing, and stay tuned. We're going to be at KubeCon with a bunch of stuff, but I think that's just, we know that's the winner, good or bad. That's the winner of deploying large infrastructure. And if we're not supporting it in a really important way, then we're not helping people get it done. So there's more coming there. That's actually one of those things that we're really working hard to improve and change the story on Cassandra and Kubernetes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the graph database then?
Graph is an interesting debate. I was just at a Graph Day in Texas, and there's this raging debate right now: is graph a product or a feature? And I think without a doubt. So what our graph is it's a top-down graph, uses Gremlin, Tinkerpop, open source. This is very much rooted in open source, another project. We support two projects mainly. It's Tinkerpop, Apache Tinkerpop, and Apache Cassandra. But we're looking at doing things like how can we use graph, in really interesting ways, because it is very useful. I mean. And this is the quick takeaway on what graph is, in my opinion, is, where Cassandra is completely denormalized data sets. graph is infinitely normalized.
Mhm.
Everything's a relationship.
Mm.
So you're covering, I mean, you're railing on both ends of the spectrum when it comes to data models by that. That to me is the most exciting part.
Is there much crossover, or do people tend to implement both or one, or?
That's what we continue to see is
Yeah.
it's not, that's why it's like, it's a debate. Is it a feature or a product? Because very rarely do we see people just implementing graph only. I mean, it does happen, but it's like, oh, I want to map a relationship to something and then go deeper into the data with something like Cassandra.
Okay. And aside from KubeCon, which I now will be at as well. So
excellent.
lots coming from there in a few weeks' time. What else is on the roadmap for the next 6 months?
For Datastax or for the project? Actually, both.
Let's say both where they cross over.
Both with the crossover. All right. Well, we are doing a lot, as much as we can. Cassandra 4.0 is probably the biggest friggin' deal of the project ever. And the reason being is because it is, I think all of the committers, the PMC on the project operators, the biggest operators have agreed that this has to be because it's so much data on the world relies on it, the reliability has to be the top. And so what's exciting to me, and I know it's taken a long time, but it's going through some of the most incredible testing you've ever seen. And there's some open source projects that are going to pop out of this around correctness testing of databases.
Okay.
But here's the interesting, and Chris, I haven't told anyone else this yet, so you're the first one. The commitment in the project is the largest operators want to put Cassandra 4.0 in production before they say it's worth releasing. They want .0 to be the best database that they can ship.
Yeah.
And some of the testing goes on like, here, we'll move a petabyte of data. Now, did a single byte get lost in that movement?
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, there was? Let's find out why. This is why it's exciting for me. It's because I don't think there's any database in the world is going to be this solid and steady.
Yeah, I've definitely interviewed companies that are kind of doing this as a bolt-on, but
this is first class.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And does that also relate to things like like sort of developer environments, the ability to, I don't think necessarily applies to Cassandra, but the ability to kind of collaborate on data like you can with version control in code?
It's not. It doesn't go up.
Yeah.
We're talking baseline. Like, what happens whenever a new node is going into the cluster, like adding to the cluster, and you turn it off?
Okay. Yeah.
Bad things happen all the
so more
time.
like a kind of chaos engineering element, I guess.
It's embracing chaos like it's your best friend. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm guessing there's a lot of work there with Netflix. They're kind of kings and queens of that sort of domain.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. And it's funny because Netflix, I think, popularized it. There's some great companies out there. Like Gremlin is a company.
Yeah, I've interviewed them in the past. Yeah.
Yeah, they're weaponizing it for sure. But everybody does it. That is, you like, here's a CIO discussion that is fun to watch someone squirm. You talk to a CIO and say, "Can I walk in during your peak period?" Like a retail company in the US, like Walmart or Target, big company like that. Can I walk into your data center and unplug anything I want? And if it's a nervous shuffle and a no, then you're not ready.
Yep. Interesting. Okay, and will you be demoing that at KubeCon at all?
Our Kubernetes operator? Or
No, the 4.0 features.
Not at KubeCon. KubeCon is much more of an operator. Yeah. So Accelerate, we have quite a few 4.0 talks going, and I'm getting ready. It's funny you should mention this. I'm working on a pick list as we walk up. We're on Alpha 3 right now, on the 4.0 project. We're talking beta here in a couple of months, and full release by hopefully summer. And again, it has to be in production. That's the contract everyone is like on board with, and that'll be really amazing when that happens. We should talk then, by the way.
No, you can just unplug some things whilst we're talking, and we can see.
Right, it's like, hey, Chris, I'm unplugging things as we go along.
I don't usually do video, but that might be worthwhile.
But you mentioned developers. That's something that Datastax we're doing right now. So there's some stuff developing there that's really interesting, like working with non-driver access technologies like GraphQL, REST, that sort of thing. Yeah. We want to open up Cassandra to the rest of the world. Like right now, it's really great with Java developers. Actually, it's funny. Our number 2 driver download is our top 3 are Java, Python, and Node.js.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And so JavaScript developers in the world unite. We want to help you out too.
Yeah. Great. Final question I always ask, even though I generally get the same answer: is there anything we haven't covered that you just want to make sure you mention?
Get out there and support your local Cassandra. We are looking for contributions of all sorts. So yeah, that's always going to be my message, and that'll be my one last thing.
That was my interview with Patrick McFadin of Datastax, talking Cassandra and many other things. I hope you enjoyed this show. I hope to have my MacBook back soon, but it's going to take a couple of weeks, unfortunately. Now, travel. I am going to be in Manchester this weekend just for fun, but say hi if you want to. Straight after that, about a week later, going to be in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Jerusalem for MegaCom, Tel Aviv again just for fun, but always happy to meet people. After that, I'll be at South by Southwest. Definitely happy to meet lots of people, enjoy some tacos, enjoy some good American craft beer. A little after that, I think the next trip after that is I'll be back at KubeCon in Amsterdam, going through that wonderful airport. And I think that's all my travel booked right now. So I'd love to meet you at any of those. And maybe some more I've forgotten about. Keep an eye on christianschiller.com/events. Writing, I have quite a few articles coming out actually very soon, and getting back into the blogging a bit more regularly. Just keep an eye on /writing on my website for all those updates. And there's going to be a lot more coming over the next couple of weeks for some new customers as well, actually. So, and also stuff on design as well. So enjoy all that. And please rate, review, and share if you enjoyed the show. It's very, very important. It helps me keep growing the show and getting new audience members. Sign up for the newsletter version if you haven't already, and so much more. All at christianschiller.com. If you have been, thank you very much for listening.